Hey, Travis here. I'll get you to the episode shortly, but I want to remind you that the New Masculine is no longer just a podcast. There are now opportunities for in-person gatherings where we're continuing our exploration of manhood and community. The New Masculine's premier men's retreat is going down on October 3rd and 4th, 2024 on a horse ranch in Portland, Oregon. Wait, what? Why a horse ranch? Well, men at this retreat won't be doing their exploration with just each other. They're going to be tasked with building relationships in real time with other beings, ones that don't speak the same language as they do, and ones whose size might just be a little intimidating. You see, I've come to learn something that may surprise you. There's a lot you can learn about yourself from interacting with a horse. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know what we're up to in the New Masculine. And if you're new here, thanks for coming to listen. I hope these conversations help you feel seen and deepen your curiosity about yourself. But regardless of how long you've been around, just know you're invited to join us. Don't worry, you don't need any prior horsemanship experience to participate. Your feet will always remain on the ground and there is no riding at this retreat. For more information about the retreat and a direct path to sign up, go to travisstock.com and click on the Men's Retreat tab. And if you want to connect with me first, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Just send me a message at travisstock03@gmail.com. That's TravisStock03@gmail.com. There's a little less than a month until we're gathering by the time you hear this, so don't hesitate to sign up. Hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoy the episode ahead. Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. There's a skill I know about, believe in, practice, and encourage others to practice that I often forget to bring forward in times of stress. What is it? Self-compassion. I seem to have learned that the best way to create change or make improvements is to critically, very critically, judge myself as not good enough, not doing enough, or failing in some way. But having tried that strategy for a lifetime, I can confidently say it doesn't work much, if at all. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I think my next guest, Matthew Sloane, might understand this well and even know how to help us cultivate more self-compassion. You see, in his book, Hiding Inside a Man, Finding Strength and Self-Compassion, available in November 2024, Matthew vulnerably shares through words and illustration his own inner journey and struggles while always reaching for self-compassion. His hope in doing so is to encourage other men to reach for it too. So if you're one of those people who is hard on yourself and or the world, I hope this conversation will offer a new, heartfelt approach to being with yourself. Personally, Matthew identifies as a husband, a father, as an artist, and author. So let's welcome him into the New Masculine and learn from his journey with self-compassion. Thanks for joining me, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
It's so wonderful to be with you. I'm so grateful that you reached out and that I got a chance to read your book. I love being able to connect both from the visual element of the illustrations, but the words as well. And we're going to dive into kind of the complexity of the book and complexity and simplicity, I would sort of argue, as we get into this. But is there anything else I didn't share in that feels important for people to know about you?
I mean, it's lovely to hear it. I love being associated with self-compassion, and I could say that it's been a journey for me too. It's not like I'm all the way done. It's a worthy practice. Yeah, maybe we'll talk more about other contexts as we go, but certainly you named the big ones. I am an artist, father, husband, all of that.
Mm. Okay, beautiful. So let's start before we jump into like what the book's about and like your beliefs on self-compassion. Let's just start about learning about who you are and where you come
Mm,
from. So when you think about growing up in our culture, in where you
mm,
live, in your family, what comes to mind as memories or stories that shaped you as a person?
yeah. So I grew up in a couple different places in the span of a couple of years, which was interesting. So I was born in New Jersey. I don't have many memories from that place, but I know that my upbringing at that time, especially, was that we were in a safe neighborhood. I felt like we weren't concerned about getting our needs met financially, especially. Um, we moved to Connecticut. We then moved to Toronto and then back to Connecticut. And all of this was my father's career was driving all of this. And I didn't take it as a downside. It was just like, oh, we're now doing this. And the family's now moving to Toronto because my dad got a job there. And I could tell eventually later these were good decisions for him advancing his career. Um, so with that, I would say we had a lifestyle that was, I felt cared for. My dad was away a lot. So I wouldn't say I had like the absent father trauma that I've heard other people speak to, but something like that, where I
Mm,
felt like I have memories of in the evening, um, my dad would sit in front of the television and pull his briefcase out, and he would be looking at papers and making notes and all sorts of things. So there was a way in which his attention was elsewhere at a time when I had hoped, especially later, I'd hoped we could have connected more. Um, so my connection points, after my school days, I was a real loner. So I would end up going home and either drawing or watching cartoons. So a lot of my life was that all the way up through, elementary school, middle school, high school. It followed me from the transition back from Toronto to Connecticut. I was in this weird place where I didn't have a friend group and it never really formed. And I think I had moved back at that age. It was like sixth grade, where I now understand that's an age where boys start to turn on each other and
mm.
start to demand a certain standard from each other. So I was not that athletic, so I couldn't be meeting that standard. I wasn't comfortable with girls. I couldn't meet that standard. I wasn't there wasn't anything about me that met the typical standards that boys were trying to live up to at that time. And so I just kind of stayed back. I was like, you guys are playing a game over there, like the standards game. Like, I'm not gonna win that game, so I'm just gonna be over here.
Well, I'm just hearing this like level of almost self-sufficiency that your lifestyle taught or
Mm,
your life taught you that you didn't have the necessarily connection points in the afternoon after school. You kind of were on your own, alone in that space.
yeah.
And then in your social life, in terms of never really feeling like you kind of measured up to the standards and what people were requiring of a teenage boy at that time. That I think we can
Yeah.
all kind of resonate with those high expectations and demands that are put on us at that time. And
Yeah.
interestingly, how many of us are feeling like we felt like we failed at that time and we're failing
Hmm.
constantly and faking it. But interesting to hear though that you didn't really swing into that faking it or trying to play in that game.
Mm.
You kind of removed yourself from the game and could observe it from the outside.
Yeah, and that you can imagine that has some ups and downs sides to it.
Yeah.
I really was honoring and cultivating a rich inner experience, and at the same time, un I was not developing any skills with other people.
Mm.
So anything to do with social skills, relational, it took me a long time later to get back to that.
It's interesting to hear you kind of acknowledge that because I think there's a large conversation in our current culture about under socialized youth right now
Hmm.
because of
There
social
is.
media, because of where the world is and different things
Yeah.
and the confusion around healthy ways to raise boys at this point
Yeah.
into good men and stuff. And so it's
Hmm.
interesting to hear you acknowledging that as somebody who was sort of growing up pre social media and pre kind of the current world challenges to notice that you were under socialized in some ways and not developing those skills, but that you were
Hmm.
also really developing a rich inner landscape, which I think is kind of not at all what we're talking about in our current culture about developing that inner world.
Yeah, I was lucky that social media didn't exist then because I could have
Same.
easily become I could have easily become addicted and
Yeah.
pressured, felt the pressured of other people being there and feeling that missing out. Who knows? But I
Hmm.
know that access to the internet would have changed my life, and I think in a negative way.
Hmm.
But I think, I mean, I have memories of like the faces of kids on milk cartons, the missing kids. And that, somehow or another, that's like a message to me of the world's not safe for kids, so may as well just stay home and watch cartoons.
Oh, interesting. So you were getting some sort of early viral messages before the internet
Yeah,
was
right.
memifying everything. You were still getting a message that was viral that imparted
Yeah,
something on you.
that's true. It's very much like a social media message just in real life.
Interesting. So keep walking me through this. Like you're this developing this rich inner landscape, but also kind of
Yeah.
missing the out external socialization. What did that
Hmm.
lead to for you?
So in high school, that led to a real study in drawing with a
Mm,
teacher that I loved and who really appreciated me. And there were some teachers like that. And it was actually like my writing teacher and my English teacher and my drawing teacher. And probably no surprise that those are things that I'd always been fascinated about. And teachers that really connected to me saw something in me and held me to a standard in a positive way. So if
mm,
before I was being held to a standard by these boys in sixth grade, especially, it was all from a place of domination and one-upping and shaming. This was different. There was this adult elder energy I was getting from two teachers in particular. So Esther Bushell was my English teacher, Shirley Jankowitz was my art teacher, and the way that they were direct with me, they were loving, and also like, yeah, we're going to push you a little bit, but it wasn't
mm,
mean at all. It was no shaming at all. So I started to get that really beautiful elder energy in those spaces. And I ended up in like an advanced drawing class at one point and just felt this like nurturing space with these teachers. Um, and still, I stayed away from kids in
mm,
general. I could shine in the art classes. That was nice for me. I felt special there, but it didn't lead to any social connections.
mm-hmm.
I was still fantasizing about like having romantic escapades with girls and never actually talking to them. And
Oh, interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that sort of differentiation between being challenged in
Mm,
a healthy way versus being
yeah.
challenged in a sort of an immature way. And it's a rite of passage that all of us go through is that teenage boy thing that we're all
Yeah.
kind of navigating. So I don't mean to like put too heavy a point on the fact that what was happening to you was something so drastically different than was happening to other the rest of us.
Yeah.
And yet you got two different models of what like being challenged and held to a certain standard can look like
Hmm.
and feel like. One that's loving, direct, and offering enough challenge to help you grow.
Yeah.
Sounds like there's that perfect mixture of challenge and support in there
Hmm.
versus teenage boys. It's really just challenge
Yeah.
and
We're
none of
just
the
here to tear
support.
you down.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. We would like to see you fall, that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, at what point did you start finding your way out of imagining connections with people your age and starting to actually make them?
I was in college. I
Mm,
ended up in the college that my art teacher had gone to and recommended to me. It was Skidmore College in upstate New York. And it was really from the beginning, the first day that I landed there, that I had a roommate. His name was Matt also. And he was such an extrovert and so fun, like so kind as well, that he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna go to this party I heard about. You want to come?" And I was like, okay." And so I basically like walked in his shadow for a little while and just observed like what does a party look like? Like I had never gone to parties in high school. They were happening all the time. I just stayed away. But here I was, like there was someone who was willing to chaperone me in a way, who could be like a big brother who's my age, and it felt really safe to explore. Um, and I discovered that people liked my humor, so I would speak up a little more. It was fun at first to be telling people, yeah, I don't drink or smoke or anything. And to be like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Some people are like, oh, that's cool as they start drinking and
Uh-huh.
smoking around me. Eventually, I changed that choice and I just experimented with stuff and ways of being with other people. And I became a real partier. And academics for me was like secondary to all this new world I had in front of me, which was like, it's nighttime, my parents aren't here. I could just go visit these people and talk to them in their rooms. And so I would do that. I would go like spend more of my time with people than on homework.
Mm.
And I realized later, like this was me catching up for lost time and really finding those new connection points with people.
I can really resonate with that. Like, we have different stories, but sort of when you miss out on important developmental skills that happen at
Hmm.
certain points in life, there is a catching up that happens later on, hopefully, if you're able to find
Yeah.
that helpful wingman or that partner in crime that helps you be braver than you typically would be.
Yeah.
Um, as a gay person who didn't get to go through the typical dating things in high school because I was in the closet and I dated
Hmm.
girls, but it wasn't the same kind of exploration that other people my age were doing. And so
Yeah.
I know once I came out, I had to do a lot of that catch up work. I had to learn some of those skills of socializing with people that I was romantically attracted to that actually,
Yeah.
where there was something at risk. It wasn't just like, oh, this is just me making a best friend with a girl. This is actually
Mm.
something that I'm trying to invest in and stuff. And so I can
Yeah.
really resonate with that sort of playing catch up thing. And it reprioritizes what used to be important and now what's important in your life now.
Yeah. And I'm guessing you have to tell me, Travis, for you as a gay man back then, there's all these like standards for boys, but then there's this other awareness of who you are deeply on another level that I would guess like you have to hide for a long time
Hmm.
until it feels safe to share with anyone. And then how to balance those different, standards. And then, well, I'm going to break this standard if I come out.
Yeah, I mean, coming out often is breaking the biggest rule of manhood,
Yeah.
exploring intimacy with another man. And so
Hmm.
it took a long time before I was brave enough to actually break that rule. And
Hmm.
so much of my growing up was about I didn't I did play some sports, but I didn't really try to activity wise do the things that other boys were doing because I knew I wasn't really going to succeed. I was more of a band nerd. I was like playing music and
Yeah.
um but the one standard that I did really try to reach for was to reject all parts of myself that were feminine or
Mm-hmm.
effeminate or
Mm-hmm.
sensitive or emotional or any of those things because I mean, I think it's a pretty common rule that the way that we sort of haze each other and keep each other in line as boys is to point out the feminine aspects, to point
Yeah.
out what isn't manly, and to define that based on what is feminine or female. And
Mm-hmm.
so I spent a lot of time rejecting whole important and vital chunks of myself and
Yeah.
spent a lot of my 20s really kind of depressed because I had really divorced myself from some really intrinsic parts of myself.
Yeah. Here's a follow-up question. Feel free to
Mm,
do with this what you will. Why do you think there was a time? Well, let me put it this way. I think there was probably a time when it made a lot of sense to people to do that kind of hazing, to have
mm.
men cut off from of something more feminine. What's your sense of that? Like, I don't know how far back we have to go, but
I mean, it seems like hazing comes from we teach boys really young, rough play. We teach
hmm.
them winning. We teach them to like kind of more destructive types of play. That might not be, but thinking about like building like some sort of block castle and smashing it is like one of the
Yeah.
most fun things for a boy.
Yeah.
Whereas we teach girls to care,
Yeah.
to hold a baby, to play house. We teach different kind of skill sets and expect
Hmm.
different kinds of play from them. And some of that is the nature element of boys developing gross motor skills faster than fine
Hmm.
motor skills and girls developing fine motor skills more than gross motor skills
Yeah.
on a typical trajectory. Some of that plays into the nature element, but some of it's that nurture part of it, that socialization and what we expect from boys. And we teach them that there's
Yeah.
always power differentials going on,
Hmm.
winning and losing, more powerful, less powerful.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a sort of that's my guess is it's sort of a natural offshoot from there is like we teach
Yeah.
play from that really early age as dominating and winning. And so it's going to
Hmm.
keep playing out as we go on. And so many of us are taught so early on what are boy things and what are girl things, and
Yeah.
it's so clearly ingrained in all of us that if we watch someone else transgress that and play with a girl's toy,
Hmm.
we need to let them know they're breaking the rule.
Right. Yeah.
That's not safe. Don't do that. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of it comes from our socialization and what's acceptable and what we're taught really early on that just sort of
Yeah.
continues to manifest in underdeveloped ways or immature kind of ways. They don't have
Hmm.
that sort of balance that your teachers modeled that had some challenge to it, but also a lot of support and connection involved as well.
Yeah. Right on.
Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah. One of the ways I'm holding it is like, it's sort of like if I judge a behavior by society or a person, I might go, okay, well, why would a rational person do this?
Mm,
And if I go far back in history, I can imagine a time when men were needed as warriors, like the kind of people that would kill other people. And if you want successful warriors, you would have to, like, for them to avoid the trauma of over and over facing that, I'm going to kill a person today or tomorrow, or I'm going to get killed. You might need that kind of person to be cut off from a certain part of themselves, like their emotional world, like they're caring for others. That's what I would assume. Like there must
mm.
be some lineage there.
Oh yeah, you're taking us way back. Now, yeah, that's like the origins of where that was once helpful and where it now
Yeah,
becomes something that is maybe overused or used in ways that are more harmful than helpful in situations. Yeah.
yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people that have trained through the military in sort of like high performance military stuff that have
Hmm.
really had that part of themselves discouraged away because in order to
Hmm.
meet the moment of combat, you have to, in some ways, put that
Yeah,
care and that connection aside so that you can attune to the task at hand. And so,
yeah.
um, and we can all have our different feelings about that, but there is something real about the way that we're all socialized and the ways that we're all taught to develop parts of ourselves or to underdevelop or let
Yeah.
go of parts of ourselves. And it's such a fascinating conversation for me when I think about how we raise boys in our current world is like
Hmm.
how intentional are we being about what we teach them to develop versus let go of or divorce themselves from? Because I think there
Hmm.
can be some really powerful growth for our culture and for our men when we start younger and be more intentional about what we're trying to build in them versus what
Yeah.
we're trying to take away from them.
Yeah. I so appreciate that lens. I think from what I understand, you and I both see people as, full human beings, and the
Hmm.
intention is to integrate rather
Hmm.
than cut off.
Yeah.
So, how do we push against that cultural norm and say, okay, well, how can this be welcomed back? For example, my son who's 4, how do I ensure that he's getting messages that men care for other
Mm,
people,
mm,
especially close to home? Um, and he'll pick the pink plate because he likes the color, and I'm like, it's a great color, great.
mm.
And I'm not creating situations where I'm encouraging, like I'm not pushing anything on him, but
Mhm,
I'm simply making space and trying to model. So that's there's some balance there because I think there could be an over enforcement of like, well, he's a boy, so I should give him a bunch of dolls to balance the scales. That feels too much to me,
mhm,
but I'm
mhm.
very open to where his attention wants to go.
Do you find yourself struggle at all in parenting a young boy and trying to create the safe space for him to choose what he likes without pushing certain agendas on him? Like, do you find any struggle in that?
Yeah, I most of it is unconscious. So
Mhm,
it's not in my awareness in the moment. I might notice later like, oh, I was let's see an example. I'm aware that his physicality is so like some of the boys that teased me when I was a kid
mm,
that I just have to be attentive to like he's not them. He's not necessarily going to become them. I'm in this moment with him. He wants to wrestle me.
mhm,
I don't mind wrestling. I actually did wrestle in high school. So I'm like, cool. Like this is a fun way to connect with him. and he like his nervous system relaxes after that. So there's some real legitimacy in his needs. So I suppose I just want to keep paying attention to his needs, whatever they are.
Yeah, that does take a lot of work for you as someone whose own nervous system could be triggered in the opposite way. Like it helps his
Yeah.
relax. For you, it could re-trigger and re-hit those past experiences that bring up things for you. And to learn how
Yeah.
to self-regulate enough to be able to show up for your kid, that's a lot.
Yeah. I'll give you two examples of that. One is like we've moved through the day. It's really time to go to sleep. There was a day when he rolled over and like clawed my face. And he's not trying, I don't believe he's trying to hurt me. It's just that he has all this extra energy. He doesn't know what to do with it. He wants connection with me for sure. And when he did it, like my eye closed right before he did it, thank God. And it was like I saw this flash of white lightning in my inner eye. And it was like my body was saying, go time, it's time to
Hmm.
fight. And so I had to like really breathe with that. And like I held his body back so I didn't get hurt. And we talked and I kept my voice calm. On the flip side so that worked out fine. On the flip side, I've had times with my kids where they're in that fight mode and I feel it too. And we work through it together. And the best way I've done it is we call it the pushing game, where I get on my knees and we push as if we're doing a high 10, hands up against each other. And we push and push so they're growling and I'm growling. And then I let them win. I pull back and I usually like grab them or I put them up on my feet like a Superman
Hmm.
pose. And it's just like it moves from like, let's honor the fight energy in a way that no one's going to get hurt, push it, move our bodies, and then shift it into play.
Mm.
And I didn't know this before, I now know from some side studies that often in the nervous system, to get to safety, we have to move through fight energy if we're in a different place. And so play energy is that mix of like fight, flight, or I'm sorry, it's more of fight energy with safety energy at the same time. So it's naturally working with that fight energy that might be in me too. Like,
Mm.
how do I honor my body as a father, not hurt anyone, but also move it so we can transition to play in the best case scenario?
Mm. I love that you brought that forward because I think an assumption people might make about men like you and I is that we're like conflict avoidant and
Mm,
we want to avoid all anger or fight energy in all of us. And I love that you're honoring that there is a natural cycle that needs to flow through, much like any other emotion. Like a
yeah.
grief cycle needs to play it all the way out. A sadness, a happiness, like all of those
Hmm.
emotions have cycles to them that
Yeah.
need to be completed. And yet when we interrupt them or cut them off, there are sort of negative consequences that come along with not really honoring the full cycle of something.
Yeah.
But you're learning how to, that coming from that sort of mature side that knows that the fight can also come with safety and that the
Hmm.
cycle can actually be generative rather than destructive.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
That's one of the things one of my biggest learnings in life is I cut myself off from anger for a long time because I had seen anger used in such, you got
Me
that too.
too. Yeah. Mhm.
I had seen it used in such ways that didn't resonate with me and I didn't
Yeah.
like the model that was given to me. And so I was trying to say, well, I'm not that. But in
Hmm.
doing so, I made myself really depressed. I had no boundaries. I had no clear opinions and ways of communicating where I begin and where someone else, like where I begin and end and where someone else begins and end.
Yeah.
And I got a little enmeshed and stuff. And so I learned, okay, because I've seen anger used in a destructive way does not mean that there isn't a constructive way of using it. I just have to
Hmm.
figure that out. I have to learn that and that I can look and ask others for support and how to do that. The hard part is that most of us have only ever seen the sort of destructive sides of it, but they're really,
Yeah.
I mean, anger can often be the birthplace of passion, which can help fuel
Hmm.
you in really important moments of your life and really challenging moments. And so what you're pointing to is the sort of an importance of honoring all cycles within us and
Hmm.
also creating a safety within the container of it all.
Yeah. I just want to say amen. Everything you said about your experience, I could say the same, that I
Mm,
really disowned anger for the same reasons. I didn't see a healthy model of it.
mm,
And I look for that as I go. I continue to look for good examples of that.
yeah. I find myself curious about kind of two different paths, and I'll let you kind of choose where you want to go with it. Like,
Yeah.
there's finding out more about you as an individual, like your own journey of like divorcing yourself from anger,
Yeah.
what the sort of what you did as just an individual person. But I'm also really continuously curious about your parenthood journey and like
Mm.
and where you have noticed shortcomings, where you've added to it as a father, where you are with it now.
Mm.
Like, so tell me what feels important to you or salient to you right now.
Yeah. Let's do a little bit with the anger stuff.
Mm,
There's something there that naturally flows into fatherhood, unfortunately, but
mm,
it's there. So if we speak to like, we'll go into my journey with anger. In college, I played ultimate frisbee. Between wrestling in high school and college ultimate, I started to cultivate assertiveness and aggression in a competitive way. And I've understood recently the word competition at its root is to strive together. It's not about domination. And the spirit of that game, Ultimate Frisbee, it actually has something called the spirit of the game, where you attend to the refereeing duties yourself as a player. You call a foul, and there's a way to navigate that with people. Um, so something about that was, I think, an anchor for me related to conflict. So here, someone's calling a foul on me. I'm not looking to a ref. I'm in the conversation with them. I'm going to do something back and say, I agree, disagree, and then we know what to do after that.
mm,
But getting my body into assertion was where it came before my voice came into assertion. The the fast track of this is I I got married and then divorced. And around the time of the divorce, I was in a men's group. And it was in that container where the assertion in the voice was given space to come out. Otherwise, in my relationship with my original wife, have I didn't have a space within me to stand on so that my voice could feel strong. And I think that was a detriment to the relationship.
mm,
Um, we were, for people who've heard of that, like what is the victim hero, like that drama triangle,
mm-hmm,
like we were in that all the time. Um, and so my understanding is to get out of that, you need to have kind of a mature look at the situation and say, no, we hold ourselves to this standard in a healthy way. Do you want to meet me there, or do we need to take a pause, kind of thing? Didn't find it in that relationship, but it was a rock bottom kind of moment for me where I was like, I don't know if I can be in a relationship at all.
mm-hmm,
Like, here's this journey of like, okay, I spent some time in college learning about people, but I don't really know how to go deep with people until the men's group experience. So for me, there fits and starts with how to express my anger in a safe way among men, feeling at the same time like here I'm coming from an ancestry and a cultural lens that says, really, men are not that safe. Like, if you're going to do something that doesn't go well, it's going to end in a fight. And then because I don't really know how to fight, or I'm not that strong, whatever my beliefs were, I could get hurt or I could die. All that fear is so present when it came to how do you express anger to another man? Um, but that was the container where it happened because that kind of men's group we didn't just talk about life outside of the group, which we did, which was great to validate each other's experience, offer reflection. We also had many moments where the facilitator, to his credit, would say, what's going on between you guys right now?
mm,
Like I notice you're not really looking at him. Or we might start doing that as participants, call ourselves out, or me. I remember calling out someone who wasn't looking at me and being like, usually you give me a lot of eye contact when I speak. I'm wondering what's going on right now. And there was the moment that could have been handled differently and could have ended up in a fight in another scenario, or could have been glossed over with humor, or I feel this like someone's not giving me the attention I deserve. So I feel ashamed, I feel invisible. Now I'm going to dominate them and make them feel bad too. But instead, it was like getting clear on like, oh, I have my reality over here. I'm feeling something deep. They're feeling something deep too. Usually they have nothing to do with each other. And that to me is where I started to really appreciate anger as like it was an energy, but it wasn't always about the other person. It was just whatever was moving through me, and it had body sensations associated with it. And I could start noticing those body sensations.
Yeah, I just really love that you had that experience. I love facilitation that's done well like that,
Hmm.
that can actually facilitate the moment that it's happening rather than just teach concepts about how to navigate your anger, how to be assertive and like that it's
Yeah.
actually right there while your nervous system is dysregulated,
Hmm.
while you're struggling with something, while you have the impetus to maybe blame someone or to avoid someone. Like I love that kind of facilitation that brings in the real
Yeah.
moment because that's where I've learned the most is like in the relationship learning, not
Hmm.
just reading a book about something and conceptually taking it in and going, yeah, that makes
Hmm.
sense up here. I want to hear feel it inside. I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to move through that dysregulation back to regulation all within the actual context of what's going on. So I love that you had that experience.
Mm.
And I think that sometimes uh men's work can be really powerful at offering that and can
Mm.
when the facilitation is really good and then sometimes it gets a bad rap because it's not well handled in those
Mm.
situations and can reinforce some of the kind of traditional the other version of competition, not the that you were talking about of like working together on
Mm.
something, but like the competition that's about dominance and overpowering and winning and
Yeah.
uh, reinforcing those power differentials.
Yeah. I mean, to that point too, I can give credit. So the men's group facilitator's name is Daniel Ellenberg, and he was able to at times speak to kind of losing his center as a facilitator in the moment as well. So an example of that, there was a day I had said something that he didn't appreciate, and he was being human. He
Mm,
was like, I'm feeling a lot of heat with you right now. And it was the scariest moment that like for that experience, that space, to have the facilitator turn to me and express something like anger. Because wait a minute, like he's the one who's supposed to be neutral and like not human and hold everything and hold all of us. He's not holding himself right now, so who's holding us? And it was really interesting to feel that because he was taking himself off of that power dynamic spot. And I loved him for that,
mm,
in retrospect. Like it was a beautiful allowance of us, and other men spoke up. And here it was another guy who had been there longer than me, kind of took the role for a minute of like speaking between us. And what a gift that Daniel gave us to let us see his humanity.
mm,
And that piece has always stayed with me. Like in any workplace setting, I strive to, where it's appropriate, to reveal my experience,
mm.
in a way that's appropriate to the moment. To be like, I'm feeling a little nervous about the direction we're going in. I want to pause for a minute and just check in with you guys. Like how is this for you?
Mm. Well, Matthew, you're already giving me like I want to like take a moment to zoom ahead to talk about that self-compassion thing because I
Yeah,
mentioned that you might give us more skill sets around this and help us invite us into that. And
yeah,
I already have a moment where you're inviting me into that because I notice myself hitting those moments as a coach and facilitator where sometimes client stuff does trigger me, where
yeah.
something the way they're showing up in that moment or the way they're projecting on me does bother me, does create heat in
Mm-hmm.
me. And
Mm-hmm.
I can uh, kind of expect some perfection in me that I shouldn't be having a reaction, that I should be
Mm.
able to remove all of that from the situation, that it's not about me in this moment. And there's truth to that. It's not
Yeah.
about our clients or my clients needing to regulate me and
Mm-hmm.
needing to work on my work for me. But even just sharing that story reminds me that I actually don't value that power differential in facility coach and client. Like, and I want to
Mm-hmm.
take myself off that. I want to be real. And what are the gifts in that moment? As long as it's done in a mature way, that's in a thoughtful way that utilizes the practices and skills that we're working on together,
Mm-hmm.
um, that how actual powerful that can be and how much growth that can come from somebody who's working with a facilitator who can do that.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah,
letting me
that
take myself off the pedestal.
that dynamic, like I have gone through coaching school and played with coaching, so I appreciate that dynamic. And I've had that same experience where I think I need to show up as the perfect one. And it sucks. It
Mm-hmm.
it's a real stifling of whatever wants to happen in that moment. Um, so and I when I'm in anything like that now, I will hit the same thing. And self-compassion is the best antidote that
Mm-hmm.
I've found
Yeah,
to
I
have
feel
another
that.
voice in me that says, "Oh, it's okay that I feel
Mm-hmm.
heat, or it's okay that I feel triggered." Whether that's an intellectual conversation I'm just having in my mind, or a like, okay, and therefore I'm gonna breathe, or I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna out myself to my client in some way to say, you know, what you're going through. I'm gonna tell you a brief story about how I've been through the same thing. Like I can imagine you doing that. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
already do that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But how do I humanize myself for the sake of the container,
Mm-hmm.
so that my client doesn't walk away thinking I'm over here and they're over here and we're so different.
Mm. I'm hoping listeners are hearing some of this self-compassion because I'm definitely benefiting from it. So
Oh,
I
good.
appreciate that. So I know we were kind of talking, like leaning towards talking about your parenting. What
Yeah,
feels important to share about your journey with parenting when it comes to this before we jump into the book? Because I know we also
sure.
want to make sure we spend some time talking about that.
Yeah. With parenting, I've faced the part of me that is rage.
Mm,
And it was so upsetting to me to discover that that was in me because I've always thought of myself as like easygoing and go with the flow and like, sure, I'm learning assertion, but I don't need to yell. And now I'm yelling. And it's like there's there's a shadow to this and a beautiful light side as well. Like I experienced that I am moving through patterns in front of my kids that can go to, I am so pissed off right now. I just want you to do the thing I want you to do, and I'm going to yell about it. And sometimes I can shift my energy. Sometimes I can show up and be like, okay, I really feel that way, but I'm going to still talk to you like this. Really, really disappointed right now. I really want us to get through this together. How can we do this? So I have these different sides of me that they feel shadowy. And at the same time, I'm learning like my wife is on the other end of the spectrum. She's like, no, like it's okay to let these feelings out. What she missed from her parents was the repair.
hmm
And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's where I need to go as often as possible. Whenever I slip into this energy that I'm afraid of, to be honest, I'm afraid of my anger. And so, how do I honor that with my kids? How do I let them know, look, the way daddy was talking to you before, it's not really about you. I was feeling a lot. I love you. And I want you to know that when I get that kind of energy, it's never really about you. I still need you to help me and get through things. But the way that I talk to you sometimes, it's more about a journey I'm on than it is about you being wrong or bad.
Mm. You're speaking to such a missing or an underdeveloped part of our culture right now, which is that
Mm,
repair work.
yeah,
That we're so there's so many ruptures around us. There's so much
yeah,
brittleness and conflict and the rupturing is happening all the time. And I think there's some people are coping with that by leaning into it, and some people
mm,
are coping with it by avoiding it and trying to disconnect and trying not to create any waves at all.
hmm,
And there's all the way in the middle between those two things. And yet I think you're speaking to something that's so important for us to really lean into as a culture is learning that repair work, that learning that we're not always going to show up perfectly, that we all have our own cycles of emotions that we need to move through, or our
hmm,
nervous system gets triggered and we react rather than respond in a way that we want to. But the repair work is where the real work happens. And
yeah,
I think that I I notice in some of my past relationship experiences, the repair work was always what was missing
hmm,
and was always the thing that that made it not work long term.
yeah,
And that's romantic, family, friends. That's like no matter what it is. That if we don't know how to do repair work, it's just really it doesn't lead to a long term relationship of trust and safety and sort of seeing each other.
yeah, yeah. And just for to add to that, when I see it as a practice for sure, that my wife and I at this point, she's my main rupture and repair partner. Um, I noticed that 90% of the time when we get beneath the surface and we're sharing about what was behind that rupture, I start feeling attracted to her.
Mm,
And I'm like, wow, sweetie, like I really love this vulnerability. And it's not expected. It wasn't expected. And it surprises me every time because
hmm.
I'm like, wow, this is like without this, of course we're gonna have walls between each other. But this smooths the way for connection.
I'm smiling because my partner laughs often that how much vulnerability really turns me on and gets me like more attracted to him
Yeah.
because when we can have those vulnerable conversations, even if they're hard, at the end of them, I definitely feel more connected
Hmm.
and attracted to him. And I think that we undervalue that as men, that so much
Yeah.
of our like attraction and sexuality is so attached to like just the physical act, and yet this
Hmm.
emotional component is so important and so
Yeah.
such a unexplored landscape that can add to our attraction and connection with someone rather than be subtractive in some way.
Yeah. And that brings me right back to the anything to do with the nervous system. Like to be in a good sexual experience, I need to feel safe.
Mhm.
So my way into that, if it's playful, that's the best. If
Mm,
we've just moved from fight energy to safety, and I'm like, oh, I feel playful, and that's when I feel open to
mm.
that kind of a sexual play session.
Yeah. I feel that as well. That feels true, and
Mm,
I think that I don't think many men talk about that. I think many
yeah,
men don't really acknowledge the where they're feeling safe and not safe in sexuality because to acknowledge that you might not feel safe is in some ways counter to that narrative that we're as men are supposed to always feel safe and be the safety creators.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
It's
be 100% confident and yeah, sure, and leading
yeah.
always. Yeah,
The dominant one. Yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah,
for sure. So it kind of naturally leads us into the book and
yeah.
what you're sharing with other men and some of the insights you're giving through giving a peek into your own journey. So
Mm.
tell me about this book.
The book was born out of the shame and pain of the divorce part of my
Mm,
life. And at the same time, the feeling held by the men's group container.
mhm,
So those two things together, as I was learning about how do I speak authentically to what's going on inside me, it was coming out in my writing more and more. And I started seeing a pattern where I would be in the men's group in different situations, or I'd go to a workshop on the weekend, and I would notice this pattern of like hitting something in myself, wanting to get somewhere, and noticing very often it was about self-compassion before I could go any further. That I had to find a way to accept where I was so that in moving forward, I didn't just drag baggage with me, but I
mm,
just was like, okay, this baggage, it's okay to put as much of it down as I can and allow myself to be like, I am where I am. And that's all I can be honest about at this point. And then when that lands in some way, okay, now what? Now what's possible for me? Um, and so when I made the book, I knew that it was going to follow a kind of pathway, and I did the illustrations first.
mm,
And they all came out, they were all done. And then I kind of paused for a while. I wasn't really sure what to do with the writing. I ended up in Burning Man, the one time I've only been to Burning Man, and ended up in a tent where they were doing this tapping thing. There's this woman standing there with like giant angel wings and this beautiful dress. Her name is Sonia Sophia Illig, and she became my EFT teacher, which EFT is emotional freedom techniques for anyone who doesn't know. And it's all tapping on the body and speaking aloud what's true about my experience from the past often. What did I feel when I got rejected by this person? And how do I own those feelings? How do I forgive myself for creating that? How do I forgive others for creating that? And now, what's more possible? What do I want to invite in? And so that narrative became a structure that I was like, I think I could put the words in this narrative framework and move it through the book and the drawings that had already come. And it became that. And it became very much an honoring of that. Like, especially man to man. Let's open up. And to be able to give something to a man in a book form means it's sort of, I guess it has a Trojan horse quality to it. It's like they take it with behind the walls and they experience it and do what they will with it. But I feel like it's a safe space to be looking at the life of another man by looking at a book in your hands as a first step if someone has not done men's work or has not felt as able to open up to another man.
And I love that you've created that first step because not everybody feels safe enough to be in a men's group. That feels
Hmm.
like a big leap and there's a barrier to entry. And I think as a queer person myself, like going into a men's group can be really confrontational, can be really about
Yeah.
like, is this actually going to be safe? Or am I going to be patterning some of my old wounding because of being in a space full of men?
Yeah.
And so I can remember younger parts of myself that would not have felt safe enough or strong enough or brave enough or courageous enough to take that risk. And
Hmm.
so a book like this does offer me some of that ability to start doing that work
Hmm.
and maybe building towards that, towards a men's group where I can actually do some of that relational work in the context of it. But I
Yeah.
think it's really important that there are multiple ways to do the work and that it doesn't always have to be in the group and it can start
Hmm.
here and it can change and it can evolve. And so all different steps are valid and helpful along the journey.
Yeah. Right on.
You wrote the book in two very clear voices. I think you described one of the voices, the voice that comes in. And I'd love to hear kind of you lay out what people can expect from two different voices that are talking throughout the book.
Yeah. Um, this I was influenced by EFT, but there's also something that came from uh I forget the author's name, but there's someone who did a great piece of work in a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. And they the gentleman who wrote it made a really clear distinction. He's like, there's voice one and voice two. Voice one is the critic and voice two is the higher self. And to hear how helpful that was in a sports context was very interesting. And it's true of any context. But just to know that, like, my first job is to know who in me is speaking so that then I know what to do next. Because if I'm only listening to the self that is critical of myself, critical of others, worried, it's all the fear related stuff, anxious, then I'm probably not going to get ultimately the things I want. I'm going to get stuck in a pattern of creating more of those situations that trigger me and make me feel overwhelmed and incapable of any change. And to know that there's this other voice, whatever it's called, I like to call it a higher self. I I believe that that voice is crucial for me, and it always speaks from self-compassion. So I know it when it speaks because it's never the one to criticize.
Hmm.
I think of it, as like the version of me that's 100 years old or a grandfather or grandmother kind of energy. It's like, yeah, I look at you and you're perfect the way you are. Like you're just on your journey. You'll get through it. It's all good. That voice, and maybe that's a societal comment too, that we're missing a lot of elder voice wisdom, at
Mm-hmm.
least on a grand scale. Um, so it would be natural that it wouldn't exist in us in our day-to-day thought patterns. But I highly recommend self-compassion as the kind of training wheels what can I say to myself to be compassionate about this situation? So that higher self voice is always coming in to offer that.
Mm. I appreciate the way it's laid out because there's some raw emotions expressed in some of what you're writing and dark
Mm,
and harsh and you can as a reader that's sometimes I think we all feel really that's compelling to like get into that darkness and that richness and then
mm,
to have that other voice come in and almost interrupt for a moment and offer a different perspective. I
hmm.
think that is so powerful just to feel in my own nervous system while reading the book, to read the darkness and to connect with it and go, yeah, that's how
Mm,
I feel sometimes too. And then to go, whoa, whoa, something else just came in. And my
yeah.
nervous system has a different feeling. And it's like, wow, like just to go through those cycles while reading the book, I think was such a powerful approach to
Mm,
communicating what you're sharing.
thank you.
Yeah. There's a quote that I wrote down while reading it that comes on page 72 that I really connect with, and it kind of touches on some of what we've already been talking about. But you say, I'm aware of how much I push other men away, the
Mm,
same way I push my own masculinity away. New voice. I'm open to forgiving myself for making the masculine wrong just because the version presented to me doesn't feel right, for making men around me wrong because they aren't reflecting to me how great I am. I am open to the possibility of embracing this part of me and discovering the man inside of myself, however he may look and feel. I
Mm,
really, I really felt that one because I have spent so much of my life rejecting parts of myself, learning to
mm,
come to peace with parts of myself. But in that journey, because I learned that skill so intrinsically, I do reject others. I do make others wrong and other men wrong I read things without best intent in mind
mm,
and assume lack of safety in some situations. And I really felt this part of your writing of being able to see the tie between the self-rejection and the rejection on the outside as well.
mm. Yeah, thank you. There's a lot there for me. As we look at it today together, I'm reminded of what I said earlier in this conversation about my father's focus on work and not having a chance to connect with him. And for sure, those were seeds planted that were like, well, if he's not here for me, fine. I'm going to reject him
Hmm.
and therefore reject a part of myself, unfortunately. But I feel, as you read that, I felt sadness. I really felt sad. There's that part of me that has pushed so many men away. And it was always safer to speak to women, but to feel afraid of men for fear of rejection of a certain kind. And just to be with that sadness, I think is one of the first steps I've taken and what I'm just feeling in this moment. Like I just want to be with that sadness. It's very real and um, important for me not to gloss over it.
Yeah, I can feel my own sadness in there as well. And I also notice the relief in connecting with another man that feels that too, that
Hmm.
that our sadness is valid and that I'm not the only one that feels that sadness. And because so much of my early journey was around tying all of the things that I felt were wrong about me to my sexuality, that's such an easy place for me to go. And so to
Mm,
assume that those feelings that you communicated in there that I feel are because I'm gay and because I was raised in this culture to reject
mm,
myself. But
hmm,
to meet with somebody who's not in a same-sex relationship and has similar feelings to me and to be like, "Oh,
mm.
it's a little, like, disorienting in a good way to go like, "Oh, I've tied things together that might not be a part to not might not fit together."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's fascinating. It's funny as I've walked through the world, people have often said to me, I thought you were gay.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, why? Why did you think that? And they would say things like, oh, just the way you hold your body and like you're so kind and thoughtful. And I'm like, I mean, what a compliment to gay people. And uh, yeah, I hope that's a reminder that, men can be so many different things.
Yeah, it's a little sad. It's like a great compliment to gay men, and it's a little sad that that kindness and thoughtfulness have to
Yeah.
be associated with who someone has sex with or who
Yeah.
someone has a relationship with. Like
Yeah.
that's such an interesting thing that I like to make sure we kind of highlight and go, these things don't need to be tied together. Kindness and
Right.
thoughtfulness do not have to be. And I know a lot of gay men that are not thoughtful and kind.
Right.
So I don't think those so nicely tie together. I don't
Yeah.
think that those are assumptions we should make.
Right. Like
But
male intimacy
mhm,
very quickly gets assumed as sex
mhm. Oh yeah,
versus a
100%.
depth of connection. Yeah.
100%. And that's why sometimes men's work things can feel really scary for me as a gay person because if we do start to explore intimacy, my
Mm.
worry is what is going through the other person's brain about what that
Hmm.
intimacy means to me.
Yeah.
Because they will always say, it will always like it's weird how often non-gay people sexualize gay people.
Hmm. Yeah.
And don't let us be full expressions of people that can connect in more ways than just through our sex life.
Yeah. I'm blessed that I lived in the Castro in San
Mm,
Francisco for a little bit. And I had some really interesting experiences. I'm going to name two. One was when I just moved there. I remember walking down the street and a man looked at me in a way where I felt as if he was looking at my body.
hmm
And I, for the first time, realized how I had looked at other women. that there are ways in which
Objectification.
a total objectification. The other experience I had was there was this like alleyway dance party. It was some festival of some kind, and all these guys were dancing, and a man came up to me and asked me to dance. And I'm standing there with my girl who's a friend, and I was like, in this like 100 things happened in that moment to me. I was like, what's the right thing to do? What do I feel like I want to do? What is she gonna think about me? No one else there knew me. And I just was like, okay. And so we danced, and it was so fun. Like he was a good leader, and he could tell I was nervous and like uncomfortable. And it was such a pleasurable experience that just like I allowed myself to be in that connection with this guy. And I've never seen him since, but it's a memory I'll never forget.
Mm. I've said it on this podcast before, but I'll say it again. I think there's such power in heterosexual gay male relationships and
Mm,
friendships because they invite each other into different pieces. Like
mm,
for myself as a gay man, my relationships with straight men help me repattern and create new models of safety with men and
hmm
reimagine what men are that beyond from what I learned as a kid or as a teenager, like to
mm,
update the picture I have.
yeah.
But then it also helps heterosexual men or even bi men who may have sex with men but are able to float through the world appearing as a heterosexual man. Like it gives
Mm,
us all access to more. It gives access to more of the feminine, to feel
hmm
what it's like to empathize with what it feels like for a woman to be objectified through her body.
yeah.
It gives us permission to actually explore more of ourselves when we're in relationships with each other and being
Mm,
different people.
yeah. Well
Yeah.
said.
Well, I love that you had that experience in the Castro. The Castro can be a confrontational place or it can be a really like lovely growing place.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Well, I've had such a lovely time talking with you about your own journey, about this book that you've created. If people wanted to find out more about where they or find more about you and your work or
Yeah.
to order a copy of the book as it comes out, where might they find all that?
Yeah. So the main hub is MatthewSloane.com. Sloane has an E on the end. When this drops, I'll probably be close to a Kickstarter launch for the book. So I think it'll be mid-September to mid-October. I'll be doing the Kickstarter for love for people to come check it out and either share or get introduced to the book and get a copy for yourself. Um, I want to say this. This is not my job.
Mm,
This is my love. I do this because it provides meaning for me and because the artist part of me wants to keep playing in the world. Like it does have a financial component, but it's a really good play area for me. Like this is, I hope, just a great gift that other people get to experience. My other stuff out there is related to fatherhood. I have fatherhooddojo.com, which will link to a Substack where I'm doing a newsletter of a post and a podcast every month on the topic of fatherhood as a journey, as a place for personal development for me. Um, and otherwise on my Instagram, I think it's Matthew Sloane author, but I can't remember if there's dashes or underscores or whatever.
I'll make sure it's in the show notes so that people get it correct.
Yeah. But let me just say too, because you started off this way, I've so appreciated this conversation,
Mm.
Travis. I love talking to you and I I hope that we have more chances to speak. And I love that we have different orientations and it
Mm.
kind of doesn't matter.
I love that too. Yeah, thanks for saying that. As we're coming to an end with our conversation, if there's one piece of advice you'd like to leave people listening to this podcast with, what might that be?
Hmm. Well, let's say it this way. My hope for listeners is that as you consider how self-compassion can live inside you, I hope that you can be compassionate about even that, like how the taking on of like, I want to be more self-compassionate, that could easily become something that gets missed and I
Oh,
could
I've
be
done that with
critical
me.
towards
I've done
myself.
that to myself for sure. I'm not self-compassionate enough.
Yeah. So I hope there's room for that second voice, however it shows up in any of you listeners, to be present, whether that's in writing or whether that's in your mind or whether it's in hearing someone else and be like, oh yeah, that's what I'm needing to hear for myself, to be compassionate about the journey into self-compassion.
Beautiful. Thank you for that offering and invitation. I think you've offered a lot to us in terms of that reminder of self-compassion. I think many of us know that it's an important thing, but I think we forget it sometimes, or times of stress make it really hard to access it. So thank you for
Mm.
bringing it forward and helping us remember it. The book is called Hiding Inside a Man, Finding Strength and Self-Compassion. It's coming out in November of 2024, but there's that Kickstarter you kind of teased in September that we'll be promoting and sharing as well. So people, make sure you go to his website and order a copy of the book and find out more about the Kickstarter that he's launching in September. If people want to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can find me on Instagram at travers03. If you want to ask questions or participate in this conversation, feel free to find me on there. That's where we're talking all about what comes up for this conversation. If you're also loving the mission of this podcast and want to be a supporter, please go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine. Thanks again, Matthew Sloane, for joining me, and until our next episode.